Bonjour, Kinamagi Nene Ireland Indigenous, and welcome to Section 1 of Chapter 2 in our Social Studies program. Chapter 2 is going to feature a study of fellow Native American nations throughout North America. There will be times where material presented may not always mesh with our own cultural beliefs, and those are going to be opportunities for discussion in the classroom, along with the teachers and our Anishinaabe Bemadzawin staff. And it's okay to say, but Mr. Ireland, I've learned, and we're going to learn to appreciate what we already know about our people, and also considering other people's points of view and being able to think about them critically. At no point in this chapter is the textbook expected to be a replacement for our own cultural teachings. So I wanted to set that off right at the beginning of this chapter. There is room to critique what is in the textbook, absolutely. The questions to guide inquiry for today is going to be, how did physical characteristics of place impact the lives of American Indian groups in various regions? Today we're going to be focusing on the Pacific Northwest. That's the region going from Northern California all the way through Alaska, and we'll be highlighting that on the map soon. Then 2, how was the culture of the Pacific Northwest Native Americans influenced by the way the people adapted to and used the climate and natural resources of the area? I'll give you a spot, some locations. This is North America. You can see we're over here in Michigan, surrounded by the Great Lakes. Over here, there's this big body of water that is known as the Pacific Ocean. So we tilt a little bit here. They're going to talk about in this chapter a Bering Land Bridge theory. This is Russia, Alaska, and where the water is shallower. The theory was at one time when water levels were lower, that this was above sea level. You can see that we have a lot of green, which suggests forest. We know based on the white here and our own knowledge of geography that it is mountainous in spots. So we're going to have mountains, we're going to have forested valleys. And because there's oceans, you can kind of assume that sea life is going to be part of what we'll be looking at today. So back to the section as soon as it lets me. Coming to North America. Have you ever wondered about the first people who lived on our continent? How did they get here? It is believed by many historians that thousands of years ago, hunters following herds of animals like woolly mammoths and bison migrated or moved to the Americas on foot from Asia. Migrated is a term you need to know. It means to move. It's has the same root as the word immigration, when you move to a new place. This belief assumes that they crossed over a frozen land bridge caused by the Ice Age, and you can see that up here, and this being the glacial covered areas, including where Michigan is. And we know that Michigan was under glaciers 10,000 odd years ago, my freshman year of high school. The Ice Age was when most of the Earth's water was frozen, which resulted in more land being exposed, forming land bridges. One land bridge was a narrow strip joining where Russia and Alaska are located today. After the Ice Age, when the ice was melted and the water level rose, the land was once again flooded. Over many thousands of years, these original hunters migrated south and throughout the rest of North and South America. We now call the descendants of these hunters and travelers Native Americans or American Indians. There were many small groups of these people, and they developed unique cultures based on where they settled and the resources available in those places. And you can see that there's a side note, and these asterisks often point to where you should look somewhere else. It says, when the Museum of the American Indian was developing a name for itself, and this is located in Washington, D.C., awesome museum, check it out. Some of your staff and communities are represented there. It pulled many native tribes and tribal leaders to find out what name was acceptable to most of them. Most of the leadership chose to name American Indians. All right, so we go back to now a more political looking map of North America. In the Northwest coast, you can see it hugs really close to the water. This is one of the regions. So if I asked you, where is the Pacific Northwest, you should roughly be from the equivalent of, Mount Pleasant going north to where Alaska starts to curve. Just along there, not a huge area. I wouldn't put it out here. I would definitely not put it out here or even out there. We want to make sure that when we consider regional groups, that we consider the region. Speaking of which, settling in a region. Among the American Indian civilizations that settled in North America over thousands of years, many tribes settled in the Pacific Northwest region. A region is an area that has one or more features in common. You look at the map on this page, what defining characteristics would have impacted the lives and culture of the Pacific Northwest American Indians? The present day states that would encompass this region are Northern California, Oregon, Washington, and Southern Alaska. In order to understand the Pacific Northwest American Indians, we need to learn about how they interacted with the environment. The geographic theme of human and environmental interaction deals with ways in which people use, adapt to, or modify their environment. And that's something that will be on the test, to understand how different people use their environments. It's also great to consider in everything we consider when it involves geography. Because of the location along the Pacific coast, there were many natural resources available to these American Indians. The natural resources of a region are the natural materials, timber, fresh water, minerals, etc., that people use in different ways to meet their needs. And there's a couple questions. What do you think might have been some of the most valuable natural resources of the area? How do you think the Pacific Northwest interacted with their environment? And how did this interaction influence their culture? Well, we know it's by water. So we know that sea life, fish, things like that are going to be huge. We know there are a lot of trees. So do you think that they are going to be building pueblos in the same style as the Southwest? Absolutely not. They're going to be building their structures out of timber. Resources such as trees, wildlife, rivers, and the Pacific Ocean all played an important part in the development of the culture of the Pacific Northwest tribal groups. One product used from trees is the lumber that was used to build canoes for traveling in plank houses or long wooden homes. So we now know what they live in. They call them plank houses, but they're long, they're quite long. We know they built canoes, as we did here as well. You see there's a commonality. Both of us had ample forest land around here and rivers. So that's a similarity between the people of the Northwest and us. The bark of trees was also useful to craft baskets as well as blankets, shoes, and clothing. Tall vertical poles made from trees called totem poles were carved with the images of familiar animals from the Pacific region to represent their families and their beliefs. The plentiful wildlife in the rivers, ocean, fish, seals, whales, sea otters, and forest, deer and rabbits, gave the Pacific Northwest American Indians a steady source of food. This wealth allowed these tribes to be very generous during their many celebrations, which usually included a potluck. The purpose of a potluck is to give the most gifts to a visitor. It showed the visitor that the giver had wealth enough to give away and great social standing in the community. It also allowed the community to benefit from the wealth of others. And you'll hear that word potluck quite often as you get older. Many times offices, businesses will have a potluck, but everyone brings and shares together, kind of like we would with a feast, where everyone's bringing and being generous to each other and sharing. So you can see deer and rabbits, Wawaskeshi, Wabus, those are familiar to us here in our region. Gagoon, definitely. Now, some of the Pacific Ocean animals, sea otters, whales, those will be unique to them compared to us. We don't have an ocean. We had slightly different animals in our area. I did click on the link to open up the extension activity, and I'm going to highlight it right now. More about the Northwest, and you can see again where it runs compared to other regions: California, the Plateau Basin, the Southwest Plains, Northeast, and Southeast. We're in the Northeast. You can have a little bit more reading on it. You're going to see some of the main tribes involved, including languages here: Chinookan, Athabascan. And by the way, some of these languages are presented also in Google Earth files. So you can actually Google some of these languages and hear how they sound. Some of the tribes include the Haida, the Chinook, Ayak, Coast Salad, Tlingit, Tillamook, and Chimacum. Hopefully I pronounced those correctly. Apologize if I didn't. So obviously here, and we're more familiar with our Three Fires nations. We have reached the end of lesson 1, or at least this portion of lesson 1. There are a few questions located within the Google Classroom that I would like you to answer, and then come back tomorrow for some more information about the people of the Northwest Pacific Coast. Mama P.